Picture yourself standing on the streets of ancient Rome as a victorious general parades through the city with thousands of captives in chains, wagons overflowing with gold, and exotic animals from conquered lands. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and get ready to explore one of history's most spectacular displays of power and humiliation. We'll discover what Roman triumphs really were, these elaborate victory parades that transformed the entire city into a stage, understand the strict religious rituals and requirements that governed them, witness the display of spoils, and the parade of captives that could include kings and queens, and uncover how these events shaped Roman politics and culture for centuries. In the pre-dawn darkness of a spring morning in 61 BCE, Pompey the Great stood in the Campus Martius, preparing for what would be remembered as one of Rome's most magnificent triumphs. This wasn't his first victory parade. He had already celebrated 2 previous triumphs, a feat almost unheard of in Roman history. But this one would surpass all others in its sheer extravagance. For 2 full days, Rome would witness a procession of wealth and power that staggered the imagination, displaying the spoils from Pompey's eastern campaigns that had added vast territories to Rome's domain. The triumph, or triumphus as the Romans called it, was far more than a simple victory parade. It was a complex religious ritual, a political statement, and a public spectacle rolled into one. The very word likely derived from the Greek thriambos, a hymn to Dionysus, but in Roman hands it became something uniquely their own, a ceremony that blended sacred tradition with calculated propaganda, ancient ritual with contemporary politics. To understand the true nature of a Roman triumph, we must first dispel modern misconceptions. This wasn't a spontaneous celebration or a simple military parade. Every element was prescribed by centuries of tradition and religious law. The triumphator, the victorious general, didn't simply decide to hold a triumph. He had to meet specific criteria, petition the Senate, and receive formal approval. The ceremony itself followed a strict script that balanced honouring the victor with reminding him of his mortality. The requirements for earning a triumph were exacting. First, the general had to hold imperium, the legal authority to command troops. The victory had to be achieved in a declared war against a foreign enemy. Civil war victories, no matter how decisive, technically didn't qualify, though this rule would be bent and broken in later periods. At least 5,000 enemies had to be killed in battle, a number that encouraged inflated casualty reports. The war had to be concluded with a definitive victory that expanded or protected Roman territory. Even meeting these criteria didn't guarantee a triumph. The Senate had to vote approval, and senatorial politics could deny deserving generals their glory. Rivals might argue that casualties were exaggerated, that the enemy wasn't truly foreign, or that the victory wasn't complete. Some generals waited years for approval, camping outside Rome's sacred boundary, because entering the city would forfeit their imperium and thus their right to triumph. The preparation for a triumph began long before the actual procession. Once approved, the general and his staff had to organize an event that might involve tens of thousands of participants and hundreds of thousands of spectators. Prisoners had to be transported from distant battlefields, sometimes journeys of months. Spoils had to be catalogued, displayed materials prepared, and arrangements made for housing and feeding enormous numbers of people and animals. Pompey's triumph of 61 BCE illustrated the scale of these preparations. According to Plutarch, the spoils were so extensive that even after 2 days of procession, much remained undisplayed. Placards were prepared listing conquered nations, 14 in all, and detailing the wealth added to Rome's treasury. Craftsmen created elaborate floats and displays. Artists painted massive tablets depicting key battles and conquered cities. The logistics rivaled those of the military campaigns themselves. The actual route of the triumph was as fixed as any other element of the ceremony. The procession formed outside the city's sacred boundary in the Campus Martius, the Field of Mars where armies traditionally assembled. From there, it would enter the city through the Porta Triumphalis, a gate used solely for this purpose. The route then wound through the city's most populous areas, ensuring maximum visibility. The procession passed through the Velabrum, the valley between the Capitoline and Palatine hills, then through the Forum Boarium, Rome's ancient cattle market. It circled the Palatine Hill, allowing those in the imperial palaces to view the spectacle before entering the Forum Romanum via the Via Sacra, the Sacred Way. The final destination was the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, where the triumph would culminate in religious ceremonies. This route, approximately 4 kilometers long, was carefully chosen to maximize both practical and symbolic impact. It passed through areas where massive crowds could gather, allowing hundreds of thousands to witness the spectacle. It connected Rome's commercial, residential, and religious centers, making the triumph impossible to ignore. The journey from the Campus Martius, associated with war and the military, to Jupiter's temple, the heart of Rome's religious life, symbolically transformed martial victory into divine approval. The order of the procession followed strict conventions that had evolved over centuries. First came the magistrates and senators, representing the civil authority that had approved the triumph. Then followed the trumpeters, whose fanfares announced the procession's approach and added to the ceremonial atmosphere. Behind them came the spoils of war, the heart of the triumph and often its most spectacular element. The display of spoils served multiple purposes beyond mere ostentation. It provided concrete proof of victory, demonstrating to the Roman people the tangible benefits of conquest. It advertised the wealth flowing into Rome's treasury, some of which would fund public works and entertainments. It showcased the exotic nature of conquered territories, reinforcing Rome's expanding dominion over diverse peoples and places. In Pompey's triumph, the spoils display staggered observers. Plutarch describes wagons loaded with gold and silver coin, calculated to impress with sheer volume. Captured armor and weapons were arranged artistically on moving platforms. More exotic items included ebony from Africa, frankincense from Arabia, and a chess set made entirely of precious stones. A golden vine with clusters of jeweled grapes, reportedly worth millions of sesterces, particularly captured attention. Beyond mere treasure, the spoils included items of cultural and religious significance stolen from conquered peoples, sacred vessels from Eastern temples, royal regalia from defeated kingdoms, and artworks of immense antiquity, all processed through Rome's streets. This cultural plunder served to demonstrate not just military, but civilizational superiority. Rome didn't just defeat enemies, it absorbed their achievements. The painted tablets and placards constituted a special category of display. These large boards, carried high for visibility, served as a kind of visual narrative of the campaign. They might show maps of conquered territories, helping Romans understand the geographic extent of their empire's growth. Battle scenes depicted key moments of victory, allowing civilians to vicariously experience military glory. Images of captured cities, often showing them both under siege and after surrender, emphasize the transformation from enemy to Roman possession. Some tablets bore simple text, lists of conquered peoples, tallies of enemies killed or captured, inventories of wealth seized. These dry statistics, presented in monumental form, transformed accounting into spectacle. When Pompey's tablets claimed that his conquests had raised Rome's annual tribute income from 50 million to 85 million drachmas, every Roman could calculate their empire's increased wealth. Following the spoils came one of the triumph's most dramatic elements, the display of captives. This portion of the procession demonstrated Rome's power most viscerally, showing enemies transformed from threats into helpless prisoners. The selection and arrangement of captives was carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. Noble prisoners received special attention. Captured kings, queens, princes, and aristocrats were displayed prominently, often still wearing their royal insignia to emphasize their fallen status. They might be chained with golden fetters, a touch that combined humiliation with ostentation. Their presence proved that Rome could humble even the highest-born enemies. In Pompey's triumph, the line of noble captives included kings and princes from across the eastern Mediterranean. Aristobulus, king of Judea, walked in chains with his children. The son of Tigranes of Armenia, himself a king, processed as a prisoner. Various Pontic nobles, Iberian chieftains, and Scythian leaders all marched as living proof of Roman supremacy. The geographical diversity of the captives reinforced the universal nature of Roman power. The treatment of female captives raised particular interest and occasional controversy. Queens and princesses faced the same public humiliation as their male counterparts, though Roman sources sometimes note attempts to preserve minimal dignity. Children of noble birth, innocent of their parents' opposition to Rome, evoked complex responses, satisfaction at Rome's total victory mixed with discomfort at the fate of the helpless. Common prisoners followed in mass formations, their sheer numbers impressing through quantity rather than quality. These might include enemy soldiers, civilians from captured cities, or anyone swept up in the conquering army's advance. They were typically segregated by ethnicity or origin, their different clothing and appearance reinforcing the diversity of Rome's victims. The fate awaiting these captives added a grim undertone to the spectacle. While the triumph itself was bloodless, its aftermath often wasn't. Noble prisoners might be executed after the ceremony, particularly enemy leaders who had actively resisted Rome. The exact moment and method varied. Some were strangled in the Tullianum, Rome's ancient prison, immediately after the procession. Others might be kept alive as perpetual symbols of Roman victory. Common prisoners faced sale into slavery, their lives as individuals effectively ending. The slave markets would be flooded after a major triumph, depressing prices and allowing even modest Roman households to acquire human property. This economic dimension of the triumph, the transformation of enemies into commercial assets, reinforced its practical benefits for the Roman people. Following the captives came the triumphators lictors, the official bodyguards whose fasces, bundled rods and axes, symbolized imperium. In a normal context, lictors projected state authority. In the triumph, they separated the displays of conquest from the conqueror himself, building anticipation for the climactic appearance of the victorious general. Musicians and dancers often preceded the triumphator, adding festive atmosphere to the procession. These performers might include professionals hired for the occasion or talented slaves from the conquered territories. Their music and movement provided entertainment value while also creating appropriate ceremonial ambience. The appearance of the triumphator himself was the procession's focal point, and every element of his presentation was laden with meaning. He rode in a special chariot, the Currus Triumphalis, pulled by 4 white horses. The chariot itself was ornate, often decorated with ivory and gold, its round shape possibly symbolizing the cosmos over which Jupiter, and by extension his earthly representative, ruled. The triumphator's costume transformed him into a living symbol. He wore the toga picta, a purple garment embroidered with gold, and the tunica palmata, a tunic decorated with palm fronds. This outfit, stored in Jupiter's temple between triumphs, was essentially the god's own clothing. The general's face was painted red with cinnabar, matching statues of Jupiter. He carried a laurel branch and an ivory scepter topped with an eagle, further symbols of divine authority. This divine impersonation was simultaneously honour and danger. For one day the triumphator became Jupiter's earthly manifestation, wielding godlike authority over life and death. Yet Roman religion and politics demanded limits on such power. Behind the general in his chariot stood a public slave, whose sole duty was to whisper continuously, "Remember, you are mortal." This memento mori served as a constant check on hubris. The tension between deification and mortality played out in other ritual elements. The triumphator wore a special amulet to ward off evil, suggesting vulnerability despite divine costume. The soldiers following the chariot traditionally sang ribald songs mocking their general, a licensed inversion that reinforced his humanity through crude humour. These elements combined to create a complex symbolic performance. The general was simultaneously god and man, supreme victor and potential victim of fortune's reversal. Pompey's appearance in his 61st BCE triumph exemplified these contradictions. Ancient sources describe him attempting to enter the city in a chariot drawn by elephants, symbolizing his African victories. When the beasts proved too large for the city gates, he had to switch to horses, a moment of bathos that delighted his critics. His relative youth and striking appearance earned him comparisons to Alexander the Great, flattering but also dangerous in their implications of excessive ambition. Behind the triumphator's chariot marched his soldiers, the men whose courage and discipline had won the victory. Their participation in the triumph was both reward and right. They shared in their general's glory and in the material benefits of conquest. Each soldier received a cash donative, sometimes substantial enough to secure comfortable retirement. The soldiers' behaviour during the triumph revealed the temporary relaxation of normal military discipline. They sang songs, often crude or satirical, about their general and the campaign. These songs, preserved occasionally in ancient sources, provide glimpses of soldier humour and the informal culture of Roman armies. They might mock the general's appearance, his personal habits, or even his military decisions, all within the licensed context of the triumph. The procession typically included display of military honours earned during the campaign, corona civica, civic crowns, awarded for saving citizen lives, corona muralis, wall crowns for first mounting enemy walls, and other decorations were prominently shown. Standards captured from enemies, legionary eagles were especially prized, demonstrated military superiority in the most direct way possible. Following the main procession came additional elements that varied by triumph. Freed Roman prisoners of war, if any had been recovered, marched as living symbols of Rome's care for its citizens. Allied kings and princes who had supported the campaign might participate, their presence demonstrating Rome's leadership of a coalition. Animals, both for display and sacrifice, added exotic elements. Elephants, camels, and other non-Italian fauna emphasized the distant lands now under Roman influence. The religious dimension of the triumph intensified as the procession approached its culmination at Jupiter's temple. The entire ceremony, despite its military and political aspects, was fundamentally a religious act. The triumphator was fulfilling a vow made before the campaign, promising Jupiter a share of victory in exchange for divine support. The ascent up the Capitoline Hill to the temple was deliberately challenging. The triumphator had to dismount from his chariot and climb the steep steps, sometimes on his knees, a gesture of humility before the god. This physical effort, performed in heavy ceremonial dress after hours of procession, reminded all observers that even the greatest mortal remained subordinate to divine power. At the temple, the triumphator dedicated his laurel wreath to Jupiter, symbolically returning divine authority borrowed for the day. White oxen, the most prestigious sacrificial animals, were offered to the god. The livers were examined for omens, ensuring divine approval of the ceremony. Only after these rituals were properly completed could the religious aspect of the triumph conclude. The popular celebrations that accompanied a triumph extended far beyond the formal procession. The triumphator was expected to provide public feasts, with tables set up throughout the city where citizens could eat and drink at his expense. These banquets might continue for days, allowing even the poorest Romans to share tangibly in the victory. Entertainment accompanied the feasting. Theatrical performances, gladiatorial games, and wild beast shows were standard supplements to the triumph itself. The scale of these entertainments reflected both the triumphator's wealth and his political ambitions. A generous provider gained popular support for future endeavours. The distribution of cash donatives to the urban population was another expected element. While soldiers received the largest individual payments, civilians also expected rewards. These distributions followed careful protocols based on social status, but even the poorest citizens received something. The economic injection from a major triumph could stimulate Rome's economy for months. The political implications of a triumph extended far beyond the immediate celebration. For the triumphator, it represented the apex of a Roman political career. The right to add Africanus, Asiaticus, or another geographical cognomen to one's name permanently commemorated the victory. Statues might be erected, coins minted, and anniversaries celebrated, creating lasting monuments to temporary achievement. Yet triumphs also created political vulnerabilities. Rivals scrutinized every element for signs of excessive ambition or impropriety. The display of wealth might provoke accusations of corruption. The treatment of captives could be criticized as too harsh or too lenient. The religious elements had to be performed perfectly. Any ritual error might invalidate the ceremony and damage the triumphator's reputation. The competition for triumphs intensified political rivalries. Generals might extend campaigns unnecessarily to achieve the 5,000 enemy deaths required. They might attack peaceful neighbours to create triumphal opportunities. The Senate's role in approving triumphs became increasingly politicised, with decisions based on factional loyalty rather than merit. Julius Caesar's triumph in 46 BCE exemplified these political tensions. Technically, his victories in Gaul qualified for triumphal honours, but his civil war against Pompey complicated matters. Caesar solved this by celebrating 4 separate triumphs over foreign enemies, while carefully avoiding any reference to defeated Romans. The fiction fooled no one, but it maintained formal propriety. Caesar's triumphs also demonstrated the ceremony's evolution under political pressure. He extended the celebrations to unprecedented lengths, with different triumphs on separate days. The displays of wealth surpassed all previous examples. So much gold was distributed that its value temporarily plummeted. Most controversially, he climbed the Capitoline steps on his knees, a gesture some interpreted as excessive humility, others as mockery of tradition. The inclusion of Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe, among Caesar's captives highlighted the gendered dimensions of triumphal display. Roman sources note public sympathy for the young woman, suggesting limits to the crowd's appetite for humiliation. Caesar reportedly regretted including her, recognizing that the display of a young female royal generated more pity than satisfaction. The transformation of triumphs under the Principate reflected broader changes in Roman governance. As emperors monopolized military command, they also monopolized triumphal honors. The last triumph celebrated by someone outside the imperial family was in 19 BCE. Afterward, only emperors and their close relatives could triumph, reducing the ceremony from a competitive political achievement to an imperial prerogative. This monopolization changed the triumph's meaning. Rather than proving individual merit, it now demonstrated dynastic power. Young princes who had barely seen combat might triumph based on victories won by professional generals. The religious elements remained, but the political dynamics shifted entirely. The triumph became less about earning glory and more about displaying it. The material culture of triumphs, the monuments, artworks, and coins they generated, provides crucial evidence for understanding these ceremonies. Triumphal arches, the most visible legacy, marked the procession's route and commemorated specific victories. The images carved on these arches often depicted key moments from the triumph itself, preserving details of costume, arrangement, and ritual. The Arch of Titus, commemorating the Jewish war triumph of 71 CE, offers particularly vivid evidence. Its relief sculptures show the spoils from the Temple of Jerusalem, the golden menorah, silver trumpets, and table of showbread carried through Rome's streets. Another panel depicts Titus in his triumphal chariot, crowned by victory while accompanied by divine figures. These images transform ephemeral ceremony into permanent monument. Coins minted to commemorate triumphs circulated throughout the empire, spreading visual propaganda far beyond those who witnessed the actual events. These coins might show captives, trophies, or the triumphator himself. Their legends proclaimed victories, added territories, or defeated enemies. Through coinage, the temporary spectacle of triumph became part of everyday economic exchange. The social impact of triumphs reverberated through Roman society in complex ways. For participants, from the triumphator to the lowest soldier, the event created lasting bonds and hierarchies. Veterans of a triumphant campaign formed associations that persisted for decades. The shared experience of victory and celebration created identities that transcended normal social divisions. For spectators, triumphs provided rare opportunities to see the wider world brought to Rome. Exotic animals, foreign peoples, and strange artifacts expanded provincial horizons. The placards and paintings educated viewers about geography, ethnography, and history. In an age before widespread literacy or travel, triumphs served crucial pedagogical functions. The economic stimulus from triumphs affected various social strata differently. Aristocrats might purchase exotic slaves or artworks from the spoils. Merchants profited from increased demand for goods and services. Craftsmen found employment creating monuments and commemorative objects. Even the urban poor benefited from distributions and feasts. This broad economic impact helped justify the enormous expenses involved. Yet triumphs also reinforced social hierarchies and cultural prejudices. The display of foreign captives as inherently inferior to Romans strengthened ethnic stereotypes. The gendered nature of martial glory excluded women from direct participation in this central cultural institution. The emphasis on military victory as the highest achievement shaped Roman values in ways that privileged violence over other accomplishments. The religious significance of triumphs extended beyond the immediate ceremony to influence Roman theology and ritual practice. The identification of the triumphator with Jupiter, however temporary, raised profound questions about the relationship between human and divine. How could a mortal wear God's clothing without sacrilege? What did it mean for Jupiter to share his authority, even briefly? The answer lay partly in Roman concepts of divine favour and human agency. The triumphator didn't become Jupiter, but rather channeled his power. Victory came from the gods, but humans had to earn it through proper ritual and moral behaviour. The triumph demonstrated this reciprocal relationship, divine support for human endeavour, human gratitude for divine assistance. The rituals accompanying triumphs influenced other Roman ceremonies. The combination of procession, sacrifice, and feast provided a template for various religious and civic celebrations. The integration of military, political, and religious elements in a single ceremony exemplified Roman pragmatism in cultural matters. The evolution of triumphal iconography reveals changing cultural values. Early triumphs emphasized the triumphator as military commander, surrounded by soldiers and weapons. Later ceremonies increasingly featured divine elements, gods, personifications, cosmic symbols. This shift reflected broader changes in Roman self-perception, from citizen soldiers to divinely ordained rulers of the world. The literary treatment of triumphs provides another lens for understanding their cultural significance. Poets like Propertius and Ovid used triumphal imagery metaphorically, applying military conquest language to love and art. Historians like Livy devoted extensive passages to describing triumphs, recognizing them as pivotal moments in Roman history. These literary representations shaped how Romans understood their own ceremonies. Critical voices also emerged, particularly among Stoic philosophers who questioned the values triumphs promoted. Was it virtuous to celebrate slaughter and enslavement? Did the display of wealth corrupt Roman simplicity? These philosophical challenges never seriously threatened the institution, but reveal intellectual discomfort with its implications. The practical challenges of staging triumphs in an increasingly large and complex city required constant adaptation. As Rome's population grew, crowd control became more difficult. The traditional route might be modified to accommodate larger audiences or avoid congested areas. Security concerns, particularly after Caesar's assassination, led to increased military presence along the procession route. The supply chains necessary for triumphs grew increasingly complex. Exotic animals had to be captured, transported, and maintained, no simple task for elephants or rhinoceroses. Prisoners required secure facilities and basic maintenance to remain presentable. The sheer quantity of materials involved, from purple dye for togas to gold for distributions, strained even imperial resources. Weather posed another practical challenge. Triumphs were outdoor events lasting hours, vulnerable to rain, wind, or excessive heat. Postponements disrupted complex arrangements and might be interpreted as divine disapproval. The physical endurance required from participants, especially elderly triumphators in heavy ceremonial dress, sometimes led to medical emergencies. The transformation of captive display over time reflects changing attitudes toward conquest and humanity. Early triumphs apparently showed prisoners with minimal restraint, emphasizing their defeated status. Later ceremonies might dress captives in native costumes, creating ethnographic displays. The tension between humiliation and exoticization reveals evolving Roman perspectives on empire. The treatment of child captives proved particularly problematic. While displaying defeated warriors reinforced military values, parading innocent children raised moral questions. Some triumphators reportedly excluded very young children or provided special accommodations. Others displayed them prominently, arguing that mercy toward future enemies showed weakness. The ultimate fate of captives after triumphs varied considerably. While tradition demanded execution of enemy leaders, practice proved flexible. Some were quietly released after the ceremony. Others were maintained in comfortable captivity as ongoing symbols of Roman clemency. Client kings might even be restored to power as Roman allies. This flexibility served political purposes while moderating the triumph's inherent brutality. The economic dimensions of triumphs extended beyond immediate distributions to long-term structural effects. The influx of slaves from major victories transformed labour markets. Skilled craftsmen from conquered territories might introduce new techniques. The display of foreign luxuries created demand for ongoing trade. Triumphs thus served as catalysts for economic and cultural exchange, despite their militaristic framework. The cost-benefit analysis of triumphs challenged even ancient observers. Pliny the Elder calculated that Pompey's triumph added more to the treasury than it cost, a claim difficult to verify but revealing in its attempt at justification. Critics noted that the expense of conquering territories often exceeded their economic value. The true benefit lay not in immediate profit, but in ideological reinforcement of Roman superiority. The architectural legacy of triumphs shaped Rome's urban landscape permanently. Beyond arches and monuments, the triumph influenced temple construction, forum design, and residential architecture. Successful generals used triumphal profits to fund building projects, competing to leave the most impressive monuments. This competitive construction transformed Rome from a relatively modest city into a marble showcase of imperial power. The Via Triumphalis itself became a special zone within the city, its religious and political significance restricting development. Properties along the route commanded premium prices. Modifications to accommodate larger processions affected neighbouring districts. The triumph thus exerted ongoing influence on urban planning and real estate values. The social memory of specific triumphs persisted through various mechanisms. Annual commemorations might recreate elements of the original ceremony. Family traditions preserved accounts of ancestral participation. Public monuments provided visual reminders. Veterans associations maintained collective memories. These overlapping preservation methods ensured that triumphs remained present in Roman consciousness long after the actual events. The comparison between different triumphs became a cultural preoccupation. Was Pompey's display richer than Lucullus's? Did Caesar's innovation surpass traditional propriety? These debates, preserved in ancient literature, reveal how triumphs functioned as competitive benchmarks for achievement. The ranking and comparison of triumphs provided a framework for understanding historical change and cultural values. The gendered nature of triumphal participation deserves special attention. While women couldn't triumph themselves, they participated as spectators, captives, and family members of triumphators. Elite women might finance aspects of the celebration or host related social events. The exclusion from direct glory may have motivated some women's involvement in religious ceremonies that offered alternative prestige. Female captives occupied a particularly complex position. Their display violated normal Roman pudor, modesty, expectations for women, while serving essential propaganda purposes. Sources occasionally note efforts to preserve minimal dignity, allowing noble women to ride in carriages rather than walk, for instance. These accommodations reveal tensions between triumphal tradition and evolving gender norms. The children of triumphators, especially sons, experienced unique pressures. They participated in their fathers' ceremonies as symbols of dynastic continuity. The expectation that they would eventually triumph themselves created psychological burdens. Many sons of triumphant generals failed to match paternal achievements, leading to personal and political difficulties. The influence of Greek precedents on Roman triumphs remains debated among scholars. While Romans claimed their ceremony was uniquely national, elements clearly derived from Hellenistic royal processions. The use of divine imagery, exotic displays, and urban processions all had Greek antecedents. Yet Romans transformed these elements into something distinctively their own, emphasizing military achievement over royal birth. The contrast with Etruscan influences proves equally complex. Some ritual elements, particularly religious aspects, may have derived from Rome's Etruscan heritage. The use of specific symbols, the role of augury, and certain ceremonial gestures suggest pre-Roman origins. The synthesis of multiple cultural traditions into a unified ceremony exemplifies Roman cultural adaptability. The diplomatic dimensions of triumphs extended beyond immediate military victories. Foreign ambassadors carefully observed these ceremonies, reporting back on Roman power and intentions. The treatment of specific captives sent messages about Roman policy toward their nations. Merciful treatment might encourage surrender. Harsh treatment warned against resistance. Allied participation in triumphs served similar diplomatic functions. Client kings who marched in Roman triumphs demonstrated their subordinate but protected status. Their presence reassured other potential allies while warning enemies about Rome's coalition-building capabilities. The careful choreography of Allied participation required delicate diplomatic negotiations. The religious pluralism evident in triumphs deserves attention. While fundamentally a ceremony honouring Jupiter, triumphs incorporated religious elements from conquered territories. Captured cult statues, foreign priests, and exotic religious paraphernalia all appeared in processions. This religious syncretism, presenting foreign gods as subordinate to but not excluded from Roman religion, facilitated cultural integration of conquered peoples. The tension between traditional triumphal elements and innovation created ongoing controversies. Each triumphator faced pressure to surpass predecessors while respecting established forms. Too much innovation risked criticism for impiety, too little risked accusations of inadequacy. Successful triumphators balanced these pressures, adding novel elements within traditional frameworks. The sunset of the traditional triumph came gradually, rather than abruptly. As mentioned, the monopolization by emperors reduced frequency and changed meaning. The last triumph in the classical form was celebrated by Diocletian in 303 CE. Afterward, imperial adventus, arrival ceremonies, absorbed some triumphal elements while abandoning others. The religious aspects particularly suffered as Christianity gained influence. Christian emperors faced the particular challenge of adapting pagan ceremonies to monotheistic theology. The identification with Jupiter became impossible. The sacrificial elements conflicted with Christian practice. Yet the political value of victory celebrations remained. The solution involved emphasizing thanksgiving over divine impersonation, creating Christianized victory ceremonies that preserved some forms while transforming content. The medieval reception of Roman triumphs reveals how cultural memory adapts to new contexts. Medieval chroniclers, working from incomplete sources, often misunderstood triumphal elements. The religious aspects seemed like sorcery. The scale appeared impossible. Yet the idea of victory processions persisted, influencing royal entries and religious processions throughout Europe. Renaissance humanists' rediscovery of accurate classical sources renewed interest in authentic triumphal forms. Italian princes staged elaborate triumphi claiming direct descent from Roman precedents. These Renaissance triumphs, while spectacular, fundamentally differed from their ancient models, replacing military victory with cultural achievement, violence with symbolism. The influence on early modern European court culture proved lasting. Royal entries, coronation processions, and victory celebrations all borrowed triumphal elements. The display of authority through urban procession, the integration of classical imagery, and the combination of spectacle with political messaging all derived ultimately from Roman precedent. Modern military parades, despite technological transformation, preserve elements of triumphal tradition. The procession through capital cities, the display of captured equipment, the honouring of victorious commanders, all echo ancient practices. Yet modern sensibilities have eliminated the most problematic elements, particularly the display of human captives. The scholarly study of Roman triumphs illustrates changing historical methodologies. 19th century historians focused on cataloguing triumphs and establishing chronologies. Mid-20th century scholars emphasized social and economic dimensions. Recent work incorporates gender analysis, post-colonial perspectives, and performance theory. Each generation finds new meanings in these ancient ceremonies. Archaeological discoveries continue to enhance understanding of triumphs. Excavations along processional routes reveal modifications for specific ceremonies. Analysis of triumphal monuments using new technologies exposes previously invisible details. Discovery of provincial responses to metropolitan triumphs broadens perspective beyond elite Roman sources. The digital humanities offer new possibilities for studying triumphs. Virtual reconstructions allow viewers to experience processional routes. Database analysis reveals patterns across multiple ceremonies. Digital mapping correlates triumphal geography with imperial expansion. These technological tools promise deeper understanding of triumphal phenomena. Contemporary relevance emerges in unexpected ways. Modern states still struggle with commemorating military victory without glorifying violence. The ethics of displaying captured enemies, even symbolically, remains contentious. The balance between honouring service members and avoiding militaristic excess challenges democratic societies. Roman triumphs provide historical perspective on these ongoing dilemmas. The environmental history angle reveals another dimension. Triumphs required enormous resources: timber for construction, water for fountains, food for feasts. The ecological footprint of a major triumph was substantial. Deforestation for temporary structures, pollution from crowds, and waste from celebrations all impacted Rome's environment. This perspective connects ancient ceremonies to modern event sustainability concerns. The psychological impact on participants, both willing and unwilling, invites modern analysis. Post-traumatic stress among soldiers marching in triumphs, the psychological torture of captives facing public humiliation, the cognitive dissonance of celebrating slaughter, all deserve consideration. While ancient sources rarely address these issues directly, modern psychology provides frameworks for understanding probable effects. The economic history of triumphs extends beyond immediate costs to multiplier effects. Construction workers employed for temporary structures spent wages throughout the economy. Demand for exotic materials stimulated long-distance trade. The slave influx affected labour markets for generations. Modern economic analysis reveals how triumphs functioned as massive stimulus programs, whatever their stated purposes. As we conclude this extensive exploration of Roman triumphs, several overarching themes emerge. First, the triumph exemplified Roman genius for synthesis, combining religious ritual, military celebration, political theatre, and popular entertainment into a unified cultural institution. This synthetic capability enabled Rome to absorb and transform diverse cultural influences while maintaining distinctive identity. Second, triumphs reveal the centrality of spectacle to Roman political culture. Power wasn't simply exercised, but performed, displayed, and celebrated. The resources devoted to these temporary events seem irrational by modern standards, but made perfect sense within Roman political economy. Spectacle created consensus, distributed resources, and reinforced hierarchies, essential functions for maintaining imperial system. Third, the evolution of triumphs mirrors broader changes in Roman society, from competitive aristocratic display to imperial monopoly, from religious ritual to secular celebration, from republican values to autocratic assertion. Triumphal transformations tracked societal shifts. Studying triumphs thus provides insight into Roman history's major transitions. Fourth, the problematic aspects of triumphs, the glorification of violence, the humiliation of captives, the waste of resources, force confrontation with Roman civilization's darker elements. The same culture that produced architectural marvels and legal innovations also celebrated mass enslavement as entertainment. This duality challenges simplistic assessments of classical antiquity. Finally, the legacy of Roman triumphs in Western culture proves remarkably persistent. From medieval processions to modern parades, from Renaissance art to Hollywood films, triumphal imagery and concepts continue to influence how we visualize power and celebrate victory. Understanding the original context enriches appreciation of these ongoing influences. The triumph stands as perhaps the most characteristic Roman institution, practical yet symbolic, traditional yet adaptive, glorious yet terrible. In its procession of magistrates and captives, soldiers and slaves, gods and humans, the triumph encapsulated Roman society's complexities and contradictions. Through studying these spectacular ceremonies, we gain insight not just into ancient Rome, but into the perennial human tensions between power and justice, celebration and suffering, achievement and its costs. As you reflect on this journey through one of history's most magnificent and troubling ceremonies, consider how modern societies balance similar tensions. We no longer parade captives through capitals, but we still struggle with commemorating victory ethically. We've abandoned divine kingship, but still theatricalize political power. We've progressed beyond triumph's cruelties, but haven't escaped its fundamental questions about how civilizations should celebrate their achievements while acknowledging their victims. The Roman triumph, in all its splendor and savagery, thus remains relevant not as a model to emulate, but as a mirror for reflection. It reminds us that cultural achievements and moral failures often intertwine, that spectacular displays can serve both inspiration and oppression, that the line between civilization and barbarism runs not between societies, but through them. In understanding Rome's triumphs, we better understand both our classical heritage and our contemporary challenges.